The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, everybody. This is Tina Nowakowski with MParks. Thank you all for joining us today for this second webinar in the DEI series. I want to thank Lisa and our DEI committee for putting this webinar together. Just to go over a few quick technical things before I turn it over. All attendees are on listen-only mode, so you are unable to speak throughout the webinar, but you can participate by asking questions in the questions box or using the chat box. This webinar will be recorded and it will be shared later today once it is uploaded. And there are 2 CEUs available for this webinar, so all attendees will be emailed the CEU form after attending the webinar, so you'll get that later today as well. With that, I think I'm ready to turn it over to Lisa to introduce our panel.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back. It's good to have everyone back here. Today was a big day today. If you didn't know, if you haven't had a chance, Governor Whitmer did a press conference today, and we'll also be talking about that along with a few other things that we have scheduled. If you don't know me, my name is Lisa Bryant. I am the Deputy Director of Ferndale Parks and Rec, as well as the chairperson for MParks DEI Committee. We've been trying to conduct webinar sessions all over MParks about different things and committees. Right now, we're going to be diving deep into some really issues that seem to be taboo to some people, that make you uncomfortable. And if you get uncomfortable, that's great, because to grow, you have to be uncomfortable. So we want you to dive in, open your minds, open your hearts, and take in the information that we're about to share with you. We have a great panel with us today, but we have to do a little housekeeping before we get there. I like to call it my upsides. It's my expectations for you. For one, I want you to wake up. And when I say wake up, I mean open your mind to the possibility that you all have implicit biases. I too have those. Today, we're going to try to tackle those. Open your mind and understand that those things are predicated on how you were raised, your environment, what you do, and who you're around daily. It's okay. It's a scientific fact. We all have them. Let's all raise our hands and say, yes, I have implicit biases. We all do. It's okay. We're going to tackle those today. I want you to speak up, because your voice matters. We want you to ask questions and voice your opinions. I guarantee there are going to be some things that you hear that you won't agree with. That's fine. Let's all agree to disagree. It's okay. Everybody has opinions. It's how we voice them respectfully and how we ask and take in information. Let's agree on that one. Also, I need you to loosen up. This is Parks and Rec, people. We should not be stressed out and think that, hey, I'm going to get a whooping if I don't say what I'm supposed to say. We're not about being politically correct. We're about making change and affecting change today. So loosen up, shake it on out, get your spirit fingers on if you need to. It's okay. And most importantly, I need you to listen up. I need you to listen and hear and internalize the information we're given today, because I guarantee you this information is going to be priceless, because the panel that we have is exceptional, and you're exceptional for checking in and sharing your information and your time with us. And next, of course, I want to thank MParks again for having me and having my panel, and thank my panel for being here, because you took hours out of your day to share your time and your information with us. I'd also like to now recap a little bit. If you weren't here for the first session, is there a shift in the atmosphere? During that time, in June, we had George Floyd. We had all types of chaos going on in the world. We had a lot of people wondering, what can I do? How can I affect change? What am I doing that's not correct? And we tackled those issues. We talked about a lot of things. We released a lot of feelings. You guys got a lot of priceless information that a lot of webinars are scared to address. and we appreciate you. I just want to say words related to change, because that's what we talked about was change. We talked about development, advancement, adjusting, diversity, shifting, transitioning. All of these words are things that we talked about in every issue, every topic that we tackled. We tackled Black Lives Matter. We tackled the George Floyd issues. We tackled a lot of issues that were going on at that time and that are still continuing to go on now, and that are transitioning in different directions. How and what you did in between then and now, we'd love to hear about as well. Governor Whitmer today signed an executive order. It was Executive Order 2020-163, which creates the Black Leadership Advisory Council. The Black Leadership Advisory Council will be included among a set of diverse ethnic commissions within the state of Michigan. Although African Americans are the largest racial minority in the state, this council is the first of its kind in Michigan to elevate Black leaders and representatives. The council will act in an advisory capacity to the governor and develop, review, and recommend policies and actions designed to eradicate and prevent discrimination and racial inequity in Michigan. Today was, to me, a historic turn. I want to really address that and talk about that today, and start off our webinar with that, as well as I'd like each one of my panelists to weigh in on what that directive meant to you when you heard it, and give us a little bit about yourself as well. I'll start off with our new panelist that wasn't here at the first webinar. His name is Brett Tillander, CEO of Metro Detroit Youth Clubs, and a great advocate for youth in Southeast Michigan. Brett.
Thanks a lot, Lisa, and it's a pleasure to be with those who are focused on the health in so many different ways across the state, and I appreciate you inviting me to be here today. I was really moved by your opening comments, the need for these types of discussions, the fact that this group has not been afraid of leaning in and leading on these discussions is one of the reasons I'm excited to be here today. I'm CEO and president of Metro Detroit Youth Clubs. We were established in 1958, and we have 5 locations throughout the Tri-County area in southeastern Michigan, and great partners with the city of Ferndale and Lisa and Lorena as well. So thanks for inviting me to be here today.
All right, Christine, please introduce yourself.
Gotta unmute myself. So my name is Christine Longstreet. I'm a lawyer. I work in public interest law. I work for a holistic public defense firm, and we represent approximately 25 to 30% of all the felony cases in Wayne County. I think it's significant what the governor has done. It is a first step toward a holistic approach to resolving issues of race historically that have been sort of ad hoc and reactionary. So I'm pleased and I'm really grateful for her leadership. Thank you.
And of course, I'm going to talk to Lorena next, because the last webinar, this is my director. And I just want to let you know that evidently I didn't make her upset because I'm still working. So Lorena Wheeler, please, boss lady, can you please introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Lorena Wheeler. I'm the director of Ferndale Parks and Recreation Department, where I oversee all aspects of the department, from the recreation side as well as the parks. We're currently working on several park improvement projects that I oversee as well and work with my team on. And when doing so, we make sure that our parks are very inclusive in all aspects when we're designing them. In addition to that, I'm also NRPA, National Recreation and Parks Association, Ethnic Minority Society board member for the Midwest region. And I just learned of what the governor's new initiatives are. Thank you for that, Lisa. And I think it's definitely the next step to moving towards actual change.
Thank you. All right, last but not least, we have Glenn McIntyre. Please introduce yourself, sir.
First off, thanks for allowing me to be here and be a part of this panel discussion with some brilliant people and professionals. And so it's really a blessing and an opportunity for me to share thoughts today. My name is Glenn McIntyre. Currently, I serve as the Senior Vice President for Student Affairs, as well as the Chief Diversity Officer here at Oakland University. In that role, I oversee about 24 departments. In the diversity, equity, and inclusion space, we have several offices, such as the Center for Multicultural Initiatives, Gender and Sexuality Center, Veteran Support Services, and the Women's Center, that we really focus in on creating change. I believe strongly that to fight racism, you do it through education and literacy. And there's a difference between the two. So thanks for having me this afternoon.
All right, Glenn, thank you. There was also from the governor's office today another executive directive. The governor signed Executive Directive 2020-9, recognizing racism as a public health crisis and taking initial steps to address it within state government. Under the executive directive, the governor asked MDHHS to make health equity a major goal, as well as require implicit bias training for all state employees. Panelists, with this new precedent being set, how does this translate into our industries for the communities that we service? Brett, I'll start that question off with you.
I think that at least for our organization, and I think the joy that everybody can feel from your comments about the governor's orders today, and the importance of that finally being joined at the highest levels here in the state of Michigan. I think that this provides a really good opportunity for us. And our experience, following the murder of George Floyd, which had a different impact. Of course, it was just another name in a series of names that changed, but the color of those involved haven't changed. For our club members, our youth that we serve, ages 6 to 18, and their extended families and their friends and their circles, this sense of hopelessness and based on a reality of things creates a huge challenge. It creates a lifelong trauma that gets perpetuated generation after generation on the club members that we serve and in our communities. And I think that this series of directives is a beginning. None of us should be willing to settle for this to be the end, but it is a beginning that finally at the highest levels, we're going to see the opportunity for an open and honest discussion. I'm excited to see, up to this point, our conversation in Michigan around DEI and also the issues that have transpired since George Floyd's murder have not included the required implicit bias training that should be included for law enforcement. And this directive that she brings, my hope is it starts to change the experience for the youth that we serve. I'll just share this short story with you in response to your question. In the week that George Floyd was murdered, we had 18 of our young women. These are juniors and seniors who are matched with the top women at FCA. It's a mentoring program. And when you sat back and allowed everybody just to share what was going on for them, their perspective, the shared perspective of a woman at FCA who has global responsibilities, making mid-six figures, who's worried about her son going to pick up a pizza or her husband going to work, the same fear that was reflected in our club members' experience. If we don't understand, and I think that today we finally have the hope that we do understand, that the trauma that comes at the tip of racism is a health concern. That trauma layers on in so many different ways, and we know the impact. We see it on the health side. we see it in so many other ways. So a long answer to your short question, but I agree it's time for us to be hopeful.
Thank you, Brett. Christine, I'd like to hear your perspective on that.
All right. So I think one of the things that's probably not mentioned enough when we talk about disparities, health, and I'll go back to what Brett said. It's also mental health, right? And so time and time again, you see in communities of color where there's not access, there's a lot of violence that is perpetuated by people who, but for, a stabilized environment or medication, psychiatric or psychological evaluations and assistance would not enter the system. And that has ramifications very far down the family tree, right? We recently saw I would say murder, but the killing of a man who had just been to the hospital maybe 3 weeks ago, right? And what you call a 72-hour hold. And he was released and he came out and he had a knife and a sword, right? And the police officers were put in an untenable situation because I like to think the vast majority of police officers don't want to have to pull and use their weapons, right? So it is an impact that reverberates throughout the community, right? So if people think that poor health outcomes, poor resources in communities of color only impacts those communities, they're wrong, right? Because people like us, we service those communities. We share in that pain, and it impacts all the way down the line from the police chief to the fire department. And so I am encouraged and I'm glad to see that the conversation has begun, and more important, the recognition that these things have been occurring. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Christine. Lynn, I'd like to hear your perspective on that.
I think it's a start from higher up. And again, when we talk about having conversations and gatherings of people, it's certainly encouraging, but I think we'd be remiss if we were to say we didn't know that these disparities in health and social economic institutions weren't present for a long time, and we had the data to back it up. We've had it for many years, certainly over the course of my life, we've seen it. I remember reading books many, many years ago. And so when we talk about that trauma that particularly African Americans have experienced in America, it's something that's handed down from generation to generation, and it has created trauma and a lack of trust. If you can imagine as a young boy being excited about the opportunity to learn how to walk, and then you learn how to run, and your mother say, but don't run down the street, because if you run down the street on your own block, you look suspicious and you could get detained or shot by law enforcement. So I think there's a lot of trust, that we have to build up. And so I'm happy by the press release today, but I think now we got to see what's the intent, and start with the outcome in mind. What do we really want to achieve? More than just the training on bias, how do we tear down the power structures that prevent all individuals from being included in that American dream? And so that's the real question. Will this move us to tearing down those power structures that exist?
Thank you, Glenn. Lorena, I would like to hear your perspective on the executive orders in a recreation capacity. How do you look at it coming from as a recreation director. Lorena, you're muted.
And just so I stay focused, you're referring to the order with regards to acknowledging racism and having mandatory training for that for staff, right?
Yes.
Okay. Well, for one, I commend the governor for taking these steps and doing this, and I'm putting these orders in place. I think it actually makes it more real for some people who thought it was just an exaggeration of people of color, or I don't understand how they are going through this or feeling that way. I don't see it. I don't feel that way. So it just makes it sort of real for some. As far as the recreation perspective, I think is very important, because again, like I said, it makes it more real, and then it allows us the opportunity to be more sensitive, especially in areas where where professionals are working with underprivileged children, that may be more impacted by this mentally. It kind of sensitizes them to the experience a little more and be more understanding. And so when we have events and we have different activities being run by the rec department, they can be more compassionate. Sometimes you may have some kids that are introduced to something new that they've never been introduced to, like lacrosse or something like that, and they may not take to it right away, and maybe not show as much interest or show interest or behave in a certain way, but by understanding how they're impacted and having this type of sensitivity type of training, then I think it allow professionals to be able to empathize a little more and be with them during the journey of change, if that makes any sense.
That makes a lot of sense. All right, Lorena, what you said kind of segued into my next question. But before I get into that next question, I also want to touch on the fact that I picked this title for this webinar, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos to Community, which turns out to be Dr. King's book that he wrote over 50 years ago. And in this book, this was Dr. King's writing that was inspired while he was in, I believe, in Chicago. And he was talking about, he was informed about the streets and what was going on in the streets of Chicago, and he was inspired by a lot of people then. Believe it or not, Dr. King was inspired by a lot of people. He didn't just inspire people; he was also inspired by others who were moved to do things, to assist in affecting change. In doing so, he wrote this book. And as I was reading this book and coming up with my outline for how I wanted to conduct this webinar, I realized that there were a lot of parallels. There were a lot of things that were going on then, 50 years ago, when he wrote this book. A lot of quotes and a lot of his ideas of what to do next, what we should see next, what we can do to get past where we were. And it's still relevant today. If you were to read that book today, and 50 years later, it would feel as if you're reading about what's going on right now, which caused me to pause. And it deeply saddened me for a hot second, because I realized that although how much things have changed, they have not changed. For all of the gains that people of color have gained, we still are in the same situation. It's almost as if we're in quicksand. So for every Glenn that we have, every Christine that we have, every Lorena that we have 10 more who are still stuck in that rut. There was an excerpt from there that kind of touched me, and then I'm going to ask the question. And it was, as long as the mind is enslaved, the body can never be free. Psychological freedom, a firm sense of self-esteem, is the most powerful weapon against the long night of physical slavery. Now, when you think about that, that's a very, very strong statement. Because even though physically the chains are gone, there are a lot of people in our communities of color in the urban setting who are still enslaved mentally. So I'm going to lighten that question up a little bit that I have for you guys and say, in your opinion, why are there such disparities with people of color and other nationalities as it pertains to participation in non-traditional sports and or activities, such as, you know, out in the great outdoors, in fishing and trails and things like that? Why is there such a disparity in participation, in your opinion? And I'll start off with you, Lorena. You're muted, Lorena. You were in deep thought, I'm sorry.
Every time. I would say exposure would be one. And I think historically, at least from what I know in my lifetime, you know, most people of color, African American people, typically are exposed to and gravitate to the sports that are on TV. So you have football, you have basketball, and you have baseball, right? And that's what's seen. That's where they see majority of people that look like them playing. And normally that's where their interest lies and where they're exposed to. And I don't know, I don't want to go too far into, you know, what their parents have access to and exposing them to as well. And so they don't really see everything else that's out there, or if they do, they don't see people that look like them that's doing it. So they may mentally just think, oh, that's not really for me, you know, whether it's soccer or whether it's golf or lacrosse or what have you. And so again, kind of talking about those chains, that could be something that is just more visual change that are making them feel either restricted or not interested in doing sports that aren't the typical things that they see people do like themselves.
Okay, what is your take on that, Brett?
You know, I know we have until 3 o'clock. I think we could go for days on this issue. When you look at systemic racism and systemic issues that accentuate and limit in so many different ways based on economic disparity, when all of a sudden we started to see the unique impact, the undue burden of COVID on the African American community, I called a friend of mine who's in the medical profession, and I said, if I see your spokesperson come out and say that we need to study this, I'm going to lose my mind, because we know why. We know why. So when it comes to this discussion about recreation and the opportunities that we all should be looking for our 100% engagement on a healthy life. You outlined it so well at the beginning here. There is no freedom if our minds are not unleashed, our bodies are not unleashed, and our spirit isn't unleashed. And our experience, whether it is our education system, our economic system, it is built on very clear, evidenced, while I would suggest also the attempt is to conceal it, chains that remain in place. And I think sometimes as professionals, you know, at least in my side of things, we can get complacent and have excuses that allow for low participation, as opposed to figuring out how do we get the participation that we need. What is it that we can bring to the table? What resources can we bring to the table? Because I don't care if it's lacrosse or soccer or camping or being outdoors. My experience in 20 years in our organization has been that the experience, the joy of the experience is universal. Look, my son may not enjoy camping. My daughter may enjoy it. Everybody's going to have their own personal preference when you drill down. But when we talk about the collective experience, there is nothing, I have never seen any evidence that would suggest to me that everybody doesn't enjoy the things that recreation in this state has to offer. However, the truth of it is that for a variety of reasons, many that are these barriers that are in place that need to be torn down, most of it is how we communicate, what bridges have to be built so that we create the experience and the opportunity for everybody. We have to be committed to succeeding on this. And we also have to recognize the challenge. You know, when you go to school and you don't have the materials to learn or to use the bathroom, when your basic needs are not being met, or the basic communication in the community that you live in is that this experience is for some and not others. We have to understand that's the environment that a lot of us work in. And I don't care, I know we've got 41 people on the line right now. We have an opportunity and a responsibility in our communities that don't experience the diversity, because those kids and those families that are in, whether it's in the UP or wherever that is, those kids are going to be out in the real world. And we have a responsibility and an opportunity to open up their eyes too. So this has got to be all hands on deck. And for those of us who are sitting back and don't see it as our issue, we're going to get crushed by that. And the bottom line is we're all in this for the mission. And the mission is for healthy communities, healthy families, and a healthy future. And that's what we all have to embrace.
Thank you, Brett. Now, Christine, I'd like to add to that question and say, what are some ways agencies can encourage and foster a relationship with people of color regarding activities in the great outdoors, such as hiking and camping and things like that, in your opinion, as a person who has engaged in these activities as in your youth? So what is your answer to that?
So it's interesting because I went to camp. I like camp. My mom was, very active in different organizations and made sure we had access to a lot of things. And sometimes I think what happens is within a certain community, we create distrust ourselves and we make individuals in the community not want to participate. So let me say that first. So for me, it was like, oh, you're going away to camp? I grew up in a neighborhood where it was low to middle class, mostly working parents, but single family households. So my experience, I had a sort of dual experience because I also went to a Catholic school, right? And my mother, although she was a single parent, she her goal was to give us exposure to things because she had it, right? And so within my neighborhood, I would say, I'm going to camp for 4 weeks. You're going where? There is this, I don't want to say hysteria, but sometimes people create like this myth that this is bad and this is bad and you shouldn't send your little Black kids away because something bad could happen, right? And so you got to start to get over that first. In terms of agencies and getting people to participate, when I started to go to camp, people in my neighborhood, there was this camp called Joy of Jesus. I don't know if anybody has ever heard of it, but it was a Catholic camp, but they would take kids from the inner city to and take them up to the camp, and they got to spend a week. And I think when I shared my experiences and then my brother brought his friends along, people had access, right? So first of all, you talk about agencies. So the agencies have to provide access, but not just access, education. It's one thing to say, we have these grants and your kids could go to camp. Maybe it's, hey, if parents are untrusting, come up for the first 2 nights, right? Come, bring your kids, get away, and let's see it and let's do it. Same way for other things. Some of it is more that you're limited by finances, right? Who has money for ice time? You want your kid to learn how to play hockey, and first of all, where are the hockey rinks around here, right? I go to the riverfront a lot, and I am amazed at how many people take advantage of it. That was one of the best things that the city could do, is develop the riverfront. You see people, and not just people of color, all people enjoying it, but that wouldn't have occurred just 5 years ago, right? And so I think agencies have to recognize, it's one thing to say we are offer this, but you have to sort of educate people as to the benefit to them, or the benefit to their kid, or you have to distill some of the myths or some of the hysteria or fear that goes along with doing something different. And you also have to get you someone who will be a cheerleader for your program, much like I was in my community. And I came back and, I had my pictures and said, wow, we swam the lake, right? So, and shared all those fun times. And then people start thinking, well, maybe it's not so bad. So I think that those things could really be game changers.
Christine, I think you made a great point, and is that we have to foster trust with our community. I know me working for the city of Detroit for over 20 years, I worked all over Metro Detroit, and people don't realize Detroit is almost in segments, where it's little pockets, almost like pocket mini cities in Detroit, where you have Southwest Detroit, which is very diverse, mostly Hispanic. Then you'll have, the west side of Detroit, which is, mostly you got your Brightmoors and all that. But every segment is different, where they culturally, they participate in different sports, they do different things. Working in Southwest Detroit was totally different for me, because their family unit and how they trust is totally different. If they don't trust you, their kids won't even come to the building. Now, when you think of Southwest Detroit, most people think of the Hispanic population, but we were also on the border, where I was, of Dearborn. So I had a lot of their children, which most of the time I had their male children. They didn't allow their girls to come up there. So what we did was, one day, one young lady came up there, and she had on her hijab, and she said she wanted to swim. But for her to swim, we had to put up blinds over the windows, because we had windows to our pool. And so she said, for I have to be totally covered. There can be no male lifeguards. And I said, we sat down and we talked and we had a conversation. And she totally educated me on what she could and couldn't do. And we actually carved out hours for them. And we named it a whole different thing. We didn't make it about, just about their religious beliefs. We made it for women only. We just made it a women only session, where all women in the community were invited, but they were able to come and swim in their full swimsuit. And we got the blinds, and we gave our guys that lunchtime. Of course, our guys loved it, because they got an extended lunch. So it was a win-win for everybody. But again, we garnered that trust, and we were able to touch a whole different part of the community. And we began to have more of that Arab population come in, not just their young men and their fathers. We were then starting to get the women to come in with their children to participate more, just from one program, and just from making a few tweaks and changes, adjusting and learning and sitting down and having a conversation. I think everybody needs to realize that everything starts with trust. You have to garner trust. If you don't get trust and let them know that I am willing to understand you, and I will do what I can to provide a quality service to you, it will affect change. But I'm sorry, I wanted to hear what Glenn had to say too, because he was always a wealth of knowledge. And I would like to hear your take on that as well, Glenn.
Yeah, I think Christine and others touched on it. When it comes to recreation, we tended to do what was safe. One of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs is safety. And so You stay in the hood, you stay out the woods. It's really lessons learned in my history. Stay in the hood, stay out the woods. And so when you talk about camping, bad things happen when you go in the woods. And I think from a historical context, we all know what that means.
Mhm.
But in the hood, there's a safety mechanism in there. And I know I grew up in Detroit, and so the message was very clear. You didn't go out to the suburbs. You didn't cross 8 Mile. Or again, bad things would happen. You were unwelcome. And so with that, I think we ask ourselves, why do we see a disproportionate number of African Americans that drift into basketball and baseball and perhaps football? Those are inexpensive sports. You don't need the equipment, don't need a lot of coaching. If someone's played before, they can coach you. And as Christine identified, those facilities aren't in the neighborhood. You know, some are starting to drift into, you know, Detroit now. But for the most part, you know, when you look at your professional sports, there's a reason why you see that balance shift to African Americans in football, basketball. Now, you know, you're starting to see more Latin Americans in baseball and some blacks. But again, it's safety. You know, we want to be safe too. I know there's this perception that we should fear African Americans, but we have fears as well based on history. And to this day, as I've shared before, when a police officer pulls up behind me at 57 years of age that I am, I still feel anxiety. I still begin to feel my body heat rise. And it shouldn't be that way. But it's things that I saw coming up that still leave me with that trauma. And so I know we don't talk enough about trauma in the right context when we talk about racism, prejudice, and the disparities and what they do to you long term. And so that mental health component is something that I'm hoping the governor will invest, you know, money and time to really explore and tackle.
With that, Glenn, you brought up a great point. I was researching diversity in the great outdoors, and a question came up: is everyone welcome in America's parks and public spaces? Data from the U.S. Forest Service and National Park Service and Fish and Wildlife suggests that deep inequality in the ethnic, racial, and mix of visitors to public spaces, especially your national parks. While the most recent U.S. Census shows that non-Hispanic whites make up approximately 63% of the U.S. population, they've comprised between 88 and 95% of all visitors to public lands. African Americans only 1 to 1.2% of all visitors, and our Hispanic and Latino brothers and sisters between 3.8% and 6.7%. Both groups are underrepresented as visitors to public lands relative to their presence in the population. That is disturbing to me. You know, it's a travesty, because I see that even in the great state of Michigan, which we have so many natural resources and natural parks and trails and everything to enjoy. But at the same time, I would almost bet money, and Lord knows I'm not a betting woman because I hate to lose money, that these statistics would be virtually the same right now. This was pre-COVID. I bet with the uptick of everybody's interest in using the outdoors, that the statistics wouldn't be that much higher for Michiganders. Why is it that we're still afraid of the great outdoors, people would ask? And I think, Lynn, you touched on it. Is because of history. People say, get over it. How can you get over something that happened, that still continues to happen in some parts of the US? It's just is not publicized as much as it should be. How do we answer people when they say things like that about get over our feelings, our fears of going out to the great outdoors. I don't think that a lot of our constituents understand the fear that we have sometimes with participating in the great outdoors. I myself love to hike, and I've been all over. I've driven all across the UP myself personally on my personal time, and engaged in hiking and things like that. But at the same time, I knew that once it got dark, I had to be in a cabin, and I couldn't be out there in the dark alone, because there are some situations that I can encounter that would be counterintuitive to my breathing. Let's be honest here. So what are your thoughts on that, and about the statistics that are out here nationally? I'll share those in the chat where I got those statistics from, and they're from census data. I'll start off with you, Glenn.
Well, I'm not surprised by the stats. But again, to get over those types of experiences and the historical experiences, it's really collaborating with people who experience. What Brett does, at Metro Detroit Youth Clubs is amazing. You take inner city kids for experiences, but when you look at his staff, they're very diverse. And so you can build up that balance of trust. So when there is that potential to go out to a metro park or camping somewhere, you'll say, yeah, we trust them. You go on the strength of that trust that's been built up over time. But it's something that happens over time, not just an immediate thing where you posted somewhere in your building or in a neighborhood and say, we're going camping. But it's a buildup. And I think organizations like Brett's are very impactful, understanding the psychology of families, not just the kids, because for a kid to go on that trip, you have to have that collateral with the parents. And they do a great job of reaching out not only to the kids, but also to their parents. And I think that's the key to outreach to parents.
Thank you. Since you spoke about Brett, let's go with you with that question as well. What are your thoughts?
Well, and thanks, Glenn, for the kind comments about MDYC. I think, Lisa, this whole issue about trust and safety is at the core of this. And also, trust and safety are required for relationships to be formed. And if we think about what we're in the business of, is being able to, through all of our agencies, is being able to form strong, healthy relationships with those we serve. And being able to understand that, as it is true in our circles, that relationships are not cookie cutter. Relationships emerge, but they can only emerge in that sense of safety, so that there is trust, and so that the relationship can flourish. And we've all of us are part of trying to deliver programs. We've had programs that we thought were going to be great successes and flopped terribly. We've had programs that we resisted, didn't think they were going to be successful, and they flourished. But the bottom line is, none of these things can happen if that safety and trust isn't there. And here's the example that I would use. We were part of a statewide $5 million health program that was funded by the Michigan Health Endowment Fund. And we were going out into communities across the state, from Native American lands to the UP to Benton Harbor, everywhere in between. And during that process, we were looking at the immunization rates of youth ages 6 to 18 in 47 different communities. Our very first community was in Lansing. Our morning session, 40% of the youth who were surveyed did not have their polio vaccination. I was sure that it had to be wrong. So I went to the nurses. I'm like, this has got to be wrong. And they looked at me. These are public health nurses who do an incredible work. And they looked at me and said, this is the silent reality. This is the truth. We look at health. on the health side, we want people to be immunized, regardless of the vaccination debate, which that's not what this is about. But we want people to be immunized. We know that there are health benefits. We want people to have a low BMI because there are health benefits for that. We want people to have a love for exercise and moving. We want that. But we can't forget the Tuskegee experiment that totally fractured within the African American community the trust within the medical profession. Now, that doesn't mean that that relationship, we all have had relationships where trust has been broken. Trust can be restored by open, honest discussion that allows healing to take place. But if we turn around and say, oh, you know, there's no way, they don't understand, and we start using the proverbial they and assign them with a hopeless demise and experience, we miss the whole opportunity for healing and for health. So that's the medical experience, you know, the medical evidence. The African American community doesn't have access. The African American community has issues of trust. The African American community has real needs when we look at heart disease and all of the other major killers that occur within our communities. The same is true in this arena. What do we do? What do our advertisements look like? What are our testimonials? Where do they come from? Does it look like and feel like us? Does it make it, is it open? You can imagine, you have to get into the head of the customer. Going up north to go camping should be accessible for everyone. And it should be safe for everyone. And everybody should feel that they can go set up and camp no matter who they're next to, and they won't be exposed to something that will become traumatic because I'm taking my family. I'm not going to take my kids into a traumatic experience. So we have to have a commitment that begins with orders like the governor's today, but we have to get people to really start understanding and speaking up on this issue, or we're going to continue to have more George Floyd experiences and more lack of access. It'll perpetuate a reality that's been generationally passed on. And the reality is, for the collective, the whole, we miss the rich experience that everybody should be experiencing. We miss that. We miss that opportunity.
I agree, Brett. I think people have to understand that inclusion means removing barriers that can deprive people of the opportunity to enjoy the benefits of Parks and Rec. So I think we have to really focus on inclusion, focus on trust, and including everyone in our programming, in our planning, in our special activities, and in everyday life. Inclusion is very, very important. In preparing for this webinar, also, I revisited NRPA's Park and Recreation Inclusion Report, and it was very, very, very interesting, and the data from it was, I have a lot of time to read now, everyone, I'm sorry. So I read and I take in the data a lot more because I'm not programming as much. I'm working harder to assure that everything that I'm doing virtually is accessible to everyone. And to me, that's the problem now with COVID, is that we're all forced to reinvent how we do and how we conduct our programming. But we're now forced to do a lot more careful, being cognizant of COVID and the spread, and trying to make sure that we have our masks, try to make sure that we have our hand sanitizer, make sure we're practicing proper social distancing, but also provide the activities needed for our community. Each community is probably at a different stage as far as how we can interact. How, going forward, Lorena, do you think we can continue to be diverse in our programming and be cognizant of COVID and try to project what we can do going forward, as, for example, for your winter programming or your fall programming? but yet be safe and inclusive? Serena? You are muted. Can everyone else hear Lorena? Can you unmute yourself, Lorena? No. Brett, I'll go to you with that question till Lorena gets her unmuting situation.
So I think that the number one thing that we have to keep in mind is the safety first. We have to understand that we're in an environment that is exceptionally volatile, where we are lacking leadership on a consistent message around the threat of COVID that creates great confusion within our families. We have a real lack of leadership at the federal level, but we also have had a lack of being willing to communicate that we really don't know what's going on. You look at Glenn, who's on the call, who has a whole university of students from around the world coming to Oakland University. We have to be able to understand that this is a very challenging time. When we add our African-American brothers and sisters and those who have pre-existing conditions, it is irresponsible for us to only look at it from our business lens, if you will, and whether that's our city councils or those who are providing leadership for parks and recreation across the state, that pressure I can imagine can build. Like, how many people are we serving? What programs are we running? So in this environment, safety has to come first. And then how, by remaining and keeping people safe and giving them good suggestions and engaging them in activities that do keep them safe, how can we deliver on our mission in doing it that way? But safety has to come first. We're all getting tired of not having that personal contact. Recreation often is done because there's a benefit of being with others, whether it's your family or meeting new people, participating in classes. For seniors, it is a huge issue, you know, the lack, that sense of isolation and not having that connection as seniors. All of these issues around COVID accentuate new or bring about new and accentuate previous mental health conditions. So we have a bigger responsibility in this environment to figure out how we can provide innovative ideas to bridge this. Often with technology, you can see what we're all doing today is helpful. Not everybody has access to this technology though. So what can we do to break down barriers so that that technology doesn't get in the lack of technology doesn't get in the way? But I think we've got to be able to really understand that what we're in is going to be for the long haul. It won't be till probably this time next year until we're even beginning to consider a robust recreation program like we used to be familiar with. And that scares a lot of us because it means budget issues. It means a lot of issues that come up for us ourselves individually. Aside from that, we've got to really focus on what are these mental health needs, what are the stress relievers, and what are the things that we can do to introduce innovative programming in this environment. Recreation folks have always been the innovators in the program space. They always have figured out, no matter whether it was in the inner city or in the rural communities, recreation professionals are always about innovating. We've got to innovate in this environment too, but we have to recognize that we can't play loose on the health side, on the safety side, or we're gonna have some situations that we'll really regret.
I agree, Brett. Lorena, are you ready? No. Lorena's just a willing participant that's going to listen. It's okay. Glenn, I'd like to hear your view from the academic side, being at a large university with all types of activities, as well as you have a lot of sports going on there with football and basketball season coming up. How will you tackle these problems with COVID and programming for your students as well?
It's been a big planning mission that's involved a lot of people across our campus. And Brett knows I just actually did a presentation on Monday to our Board of Trustees that really outlined about a 50-page document as to how we're going to address the fall semester, everything from the classroom experience to student organizations, athletics. And so it's really a collaboration of faculty, staff, and students being at the table and really reinventing what college will be like. And so that means, we talk about unprecedented times, there's also the present moment to create the future. And so with that in mind, when it comes to recreation, we're looking at hybrid, and that we'll have some face-to-face, but the bulk of it will be remote. And so using technology to reach different groups is very important. We're aware of different technology gaps, and so making sure all of our students have access to appropriate technology is very important. And when we, moved to a remote environment back in March, we thought, well, we'll move in 48 hours and all of our students will move with us. And then you saw the disparities that everyone was talking about. And so things that we had never considered would be experiences of college students not having access to technology. We had to address those. And it took us about a month to be able to reach out to students and have them share with us what their needs were. And so it's funny because we had a donation of Chromebooks, which is very nice, don't get me wrong, but it didn't meet the needs of the students for the kind of technology we're using to access support services as well as the classroom experience. And so we're looking at every aspect when it comes to our sports. We have Division I sports, and so right now we're kind of at the mercy of the NCAA, and they're trying to figure out on an hourly basis what to do, which impacts all of our sport teams. And it looks like the fall season, may be delayed or not happen. And so there's a lot of ramifications to that when you talk about Division I sports, because when you have football and basketball, you have a draft involved, and so you can't just simply say we'll move those sports to the winter semester because it interferes with other plans that they have, professional plans that they have. And so what we're trying to do is, again, be inclusive, bring everyone to the table so everyone is represented, so you hear those diverse voices and the different needs that most of us really never consider. And so our committee, we have 2 primary committees, but then we have 12 subcommittees, and so it's populated with about 60 people. And so we've been trying to manage all those voices, but so far, again, the plan that was presented on Monday, I think it will be impactful, but again, we're following the executive orders, and so we want to stay nimble and flexible in providing services to students.
All right, we'll see if can Lorena speak now.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yay, you're back.
Great. So you're going to have to repeat the question unless you want to wait for me for the next one because my computer has shut down when you were talking.
Oh, wow. I honestly asked so much. I don't remember exactly. It was about COVID and programming and how we can stay, how you plan on staying diverse in your programming, especially since most of us are having to program virtually going forward for the fall season.
So how we plan to remain diverse? Well, these are definitely innovative times for the Parks and Recreation Department. We've become very familiar with our community and those who participate in our programs, and try to continue to leverage off those relationships that we've already built. I think it's almost starting brand new because you don't know what people are really comfortable with or what they want to do virtually. Some things they do in person, like kids may want a gymnastics class, or adults may want a fitness class, but they want that human interaction as opposed to doing it virtually, and they may not be interested. So at this time, it's pretty much just we're identifying what the gaps are, where the interest is and where the needs are, and trying to fulfill those needs with the resources that we have. I think with the kids, they're looking for anything right now to pretty much keep them busy. Something that they can use their hands and their minds, and just any type of fun, since they can't go out and do things that they normally would do in the summer. But I do think it's important to remain relevant and be at the service of our community to whatever those needs are. And it's an ongoing thing. We're still trying to figure it out. And you also have to continue to do pulse checks to make sure that what you're doing is safe, and is a certain comfort level for the participants to want to do it. So I think that we all are pretty much experiencing uncharted territory. Some of the things that we are doing have been very successful and well received, such as one of the programs we're working on, and Lisa's been leading it, so I know she's the best person to talk about it. But we're giving away sport kits for our youth. So the parents come, we drop it in their trunk, they're able to go home. Now they have these resources at home to play outside. So it's getting them out, it's getting them the tools that they need to be able to do whatever activity it is for that week. So for whether it's soccer or basketball or just general play, so on and so forth. But now they have the tools that they need to do that. We're looking into doing more programming like that, like I said, so the kids can be more hands-on, so they can get out. So if these are things that they don't have in their house, now that they have them, because I don't know about you guys, but I've been seeing at all the stores all around, you can't get anything. You're on a waiting list for months just to get a bike, and the prices escalated, so people are really making a profit during this time. So just trying to, again, fill in some of those gaps, provide some resources where there aren't any, or is unaffordable or unattainable for our youth, to get them, and our seniors as well. So that's where we're leaning towards at this time. We're really concerned about our seniors as well. So some of these activities like craft kits and sport kits, we're similar to the sports kits. We're trying to tailor that towards our senior population as well. It's a lot of, again, uncharted territory and a lot of needs that are out there that we're just trying to figure out what they are and do the best that we can to fulfill them in a safe manner. And I hope that answered your question.
Yes. And also, I would love to share a resource with all of my people on the call right now. A great resource for sporting equipment at such a minimal price. It almost feels like it's not true. If you are able to right now, write down goodsports.org. It is an organization, and that a grant organization that will send you sporting equipment for, I believe at this time, it is 15% of the shipping cost, which means I've been a part of this grant program for many years, and it's a 2-year grant, and they send us equipment. At one point, we got literally about $50,000 worth of brand new equipment. It's equipment that I never would have been able to afford for our program, and it is greatly needed at a time like this, where we're all experiencing budget reductions. So if you can, go ahead, and I'll make sure and put it in the chat as well. It's called goodsports.org, and please tell them Ferndale referred you. But it is it's a great program, and if you are on a limited budget, you can go right on their catalog and order different types of equipment. The equipment goes very fast, so make sure that you have the funds available to make your purchase as soon as you look at the catalog. And they're great, and they've been of great assistance to us. So I'm glad to share that information with the rest of my recreation brothers and sisters out there, and hopefully it'll assist you in getting your programs going again. All right. Right now, I would like to read an excerpt from the book and then see how it resonates with our panel. This excerpt is a really good one from the book. This is not a book club, I know, guys, but this book really touched me deeply about what's going on right now in all of our communities. And it said, one of the great liabilities of history is that all too many people fail to remain awake through great periods of social change. Every society has its protectors of the status quo and its fraternities of the indifferent, who are notorious for sleeping through revolutions. But today, our very survival depends on our ability to stay awake, to adjust to new ideas, to remain vigilant, and to face the challenge of change. I think that that whole excerpt it just touched me deeply, because it is exactly what is going on today. Like I said, he wrote this book 50 years ago, and it still resonates today. After hearing that excerpt, Christine, what does it say to you as a I would say a very successful young Black woman in this society right now?
So I think that incrementally we've all, with each generation we've lived through some sort of change, right? And for me and maybe my mom, I got to see Barack Obama elected, something that I didn't think would happen, right? From everything that I grew up knowing and hearing and understanding and seeing about revolution and community. But that said, I think that it is one of those things that also make people think, oh, we've done it. We have this utopia, we have this society where everyone is accepted, and there is no need to, continue with this sort of revolution or this idea or thought that, everybody is equal. Because, hey, I mean, this United States elected a Black president before a woman, I might add. So what does that say? But that's a whole nother conversation. Okay, so I think that listening to that quote, it just reminds us that there's so much more to do. There's so much more to accomplish. And, although in my community, we're still sort of experiencing the first person this, the first person that. And I think what this pandemic has taught us, I think we were all sitting at home and we had a moment, and what was happening to George Floyd really sunk in. Because I will remind you of Rodney King. And that, yes, people picketed and they protested, but we kind of left that where it was. And so hopefully in this moment that, we will really see some real, true, concrete change that we can really touch and feel.
Thank you. Glenn, do you have any words?
Yeah, I think that's a very relevant quote. It's funny that John Lewis, who was one of the original members of the Civil Rights Movement, that Dr. Martin Luther King just passed away. And one of the things that he said in his last interview, when someone said, it's funny how things haven't changed, he corrected them very quickly and says, they have. I think back when I got involved in the civil rights movement, and they're separate and unequal, where you couldn't go into establishments and you really did have a glass ceiling and your life was in danger when you challenged the establishment. And so I want us to put things in the right framework. Things have changed, but as that quote really reflects, we have to make sure that we understand the game. The game is changing now. It's just like our country. We went from an agricultural society to industrial society, now a technology-enhanced society. And if we don't change with that and recognize that change, you won't have that awakening to what's out there as opportunities. And I think the COVID has really challenged us, our way of thinking, our way of living, our way of behaving. When we thought about the technology gaps, now we have to address those things. Technology is a way of life now. We're looking at now, the good thing about the COVID, one of the good things is that when we talk about the technology disparity, we have to address it now. And so you see Detroit Public Schools, which is a district that I attended as a youth, they're getting support to address those issues. That support, I would argue, would have never came unless we had this pandemic. Now there's millions of dollars being flooded into these urban areas to shore up some of those deficiencies. But we have to make sure that we teach those young people, this is not a toy. Technology is becoming a way of life and a way of upward mobility. And so I would say there needs to be an awakening, sure, to the disparities, but also to the opportunities. And I think you're finding out more and more now when you start to look at the numbers of some of the suburban K-12 districts. They don't find it fun to share their data about student performance, outcome data, because their kids are just as distracted, even though they have greater access to opportunities. So again, I think we have to realize that we have to be more conscious as to where we're at now. 2020 is very different than John Lewis' experiences in the 60s and even the early 70s. So I think we have a lot of room for hope and a lot of room for movement. And that collective effort is very important. And so everyone, again, needs to be at the table trying to figure out the pathway forward. But we have to be solution-oriented, not history stagnant. And that's what a lot of conversations are. And at this point, I try to stay away from those conversations. It's just a historical lesson on what was, and now it's time to move forward. And so as Chief Diversity Officer, that's our plan, is that I have a diversity council that's a cross-representation of faculty, staff, students, and community leaders. And we focus on solutions and things that we can do in 6-month increments. What can we get done that would be impactful? And I think that's where we want to be when it comes to Parks and Recs. Take it off, because I think you lose momentum when we say we got a 5-year plan or a 10-year plan. You lose people, you lose momentum. You know, but what can we do in 6-month increments is really the way I approach the leadership experience for myself.
I think that's a great point. Setting achievable goals. I've learned to do that as I've increased my level of supervisor responsibilities. Is that setting small goals for not only my staff but myself. Small achievable goals assist you, and especially when you're trying to inject change into an organization or into an activity or anything to do with any business. I'm quite sure Christine can chime in with that as well. Is that when you set short-term goals, long-term goals are great. It gives you something to shoot for, you know, a year from now or whatever. But those smaller goals give you a reason to cheer not only your team but yourself when you achieve those, and it gives you the strength to carry on. Lorena, I'd also like to hear you. Oh, go ahead, Lynn.
I want to make sure that put it in the right framework. I don't set small goals.
Not small goals,
I set
but
visionary goals. I set visionary goals, that I'm not sure we can achieve, but I believe if I get the right people around the table, we can stretch our capacity, use our resources, and then achieve those things. And so I don't, set goals that I know I can achieve, and we're working on a project now. Brett and I are working on one, and it's stretching us, but we're bringing the people to the table. Hopefully we'll bring some of the people here to the table and on the phone as well, but it's stretching us. But it's forcing me to think, how can I help move this along? Who's in my Rolodex that should be at the table? And I think that's the way we have to perform. Bring the right people to the table and you can do big things.
That's true. I think anybody who knows me, when I say small goals, it'd be tremendous. And as I like to use ginormous to other people, my small goals are are just short-term goals that keep me focused. It keeps me focused, and it just lets me know that I only have this amount of time and I need to really focus and drill down and get the job done. So when I say that, anybody knows me, I push hard and I push fast. You guys know we put this together in 2 weeks. So I push hard and I push fast, and I put together phenomenal teams because I think you have to surround yourself with phenomenal people if you want to get a job done, a quality job done. You have to surround yourself with a great team. So that's been my my mantra going forward with anything. Not to get off the subject, because me and Glenn can go back and forth and talk forever. Lorena, I'd like to pull you into this discussion as well about the excerpt that I read.
Yeah, first, Glenn, I 100% agree with you. I'm a firm believer of putting all the right people in the room to make the right decisions and to get things done and move forward. So I definitely agree with that. Another good point that you made was about adapting and opportunities that may be created during this time with COVID. And I think that a lot of people are adapting to COVID in a vacuum. My household, how can I make sure I'm working, I'm schooling my children, and have some time to be a wife or a husband, so on and so forth, and trying to just adapt internally. And there may be a lot of missed opportunities for people to advance and get out there. So that was a great point that you made. In regards to the excerpt that you mentioned, what comes to mind to me is keep the fire burning. You got to keep the fire burning. You just can't let it die. We have this movement that's going, and I see some people, it's just fading off. Like, okay, we made a stance. It was, all these rallies and people hurt us, and now let me see what I can do this weekend. Let me relax. Let me lay off a little bit. But it's like, no, justice still needs to be served for some, and in addition to that, we still need to make a permanent change. And so the next thing that kind of resonates with me is don't accept small change because it'll fade away. So especially if we're trying to make generational change. So we need to make sure that, keep pushing, keep trying to keep it live and be active in what the movement is, and to make change where you can. And I think with what the governor is doing is great and helps propel us in that effort. Also, I think that during this time, the importance of park and recreation is really being displayed and showing our place in society. It's unfortunate that everywhere you go, park recreation is always the first to be cut, no matter what it is, even COVID. But I think everybody sees the importance of our parks and the importance of recreating, especially during this time. So we affect people's lives, and we do that whether it's COVID or whether it's not COVID. It's just, I think now it's being seen more.
Thank you, Lorena. Brett, did I get you to chime in on that as well?
No, but I'd be glad to. Malice Green comes to mind here locally.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the parts of that discussion with our young women and the women at FCA that probably moved me the most, and in a way that will never leave, it'll stick with me forever, was one of our young women was talking about how this experience has impacted her. And one of the professionals from FCA, through a lot of emotion, made something really clear to everybody on the call. There was about 50 folks on the call just like this. And she talked about that this isn't our problem to solve. And she was speaking specifically to the African Americans on the call. And I think that the hope in this environment, with what is now just another page in this experience with George Floyd, is that those of us who are white stand up. Because as long as we remain silent and don't lean in and don't take big action and don't lend our voice to this, we leave it to the very group of people who are being traumatized and harmed, and it needs to stop. So my hope when I hear that is that the change that is now emerging is that people are really speaking up. And when I say people, it's everybody. It's one thing for a group that has been traumatized to speak up and to march and to protest and demand equal treatment. It is another when the entire community stands up and says what is going on must end. And it is also, for me, an indication of how healthy the community is. And I'm hopeful, because right now, if we're looking at the patient, whatever you want to use as the patient, I am concerned that we're just going to have another crisis in the health of this patient that's going to come forward. My hope is that as a community, as a collective, we're going to see real change, and it's going to require everybody stepping up and taking action. And the other part of this, and just closing up on this for me, is that we have to have measurable goals when it comes to these issues. If we just sit back and don't have the evidence of the next thing or the next crisis or the next victim or the next headline, if that's all we do is how we measure it, we're going to miss the mark. But our communities, and I think Parks and Rec have a great opportunity to do this in partnership with law enforcement and our health departments, is being able to report to the community as a whole, is this a safe and healthy community? And what do we measure that by? Not just how many steps were taken in the community, but how many incidents of hate occurred in our community? How many incidents where police brutality impacted somebody in our community? If we don't start to measure these things, and you look at COVID, COVID arrived in our communities, and we all started having press conferences every week. Just like you said earlier, Lisa. Who's got it? Where did they get it? What are we doing about it? What do you got to do? Wear your mask. It was this, we've been doing this every week since March. Well, if racism is a real health threat, which I believe it is, and I support that, we should be measuring this too. I don't suggest weekly press conferences, but I would love a quarterly report for communities to be able to talk about how many police reports were there, how many other issues that we can measure in terms of, is this a healthy community or not? And if we don't, Grand Rapids, the city of Grand Rapids has done this with their police department. They do a quarterly survey of all of their communities. The responses come back based on gender, based on neighborhood, based on color, and they report back the level of trust with the police department in Grand Rapids. Last quarter, it was 67% of those who responded trust the police department. I don't know what their overall goal is, but I would have a hunch that if, as they move forward, and we had 92% of the trust there, or a higher number than 67, my hunch is that we're going to have a healthier community in Grand Rapids. We're going to have people who feel safe, who are out on the street, exercising, doing things that they've never done before. There's going to be more confidence in the community. Well, couldn't we do that in every one of the communities that are represented on this call today? Couldn't Parks and Rec report out on not just the myopic part of health in the community, but the global health all of the things that go into a healthy community. So I think we have to start measuring that. And I think we have to be willing to have those conversations, because as soon as we start measuring, we have to start explaining. So when I go to my doctor's office and I get on the scale, I either have a really good joke or I've got an explanation for the visit. So this is life and death. In many cases, this is health and the absence of it. It's health or trauma. We should be measuring these things and forcing these conversations.
I agree. I agree totally with that. I like that. I never thought about it in that way, about measuring, and especially with the executive order now. What you said, it really hits home about measuring that. It really piggybacks off of what Glenn said as well. Setting those goals. What was Grand Rapids' goal? I would love to know that as well. Because that's a nice percentage, but I would love to see 85-90% of the community. That's when I would say you are really hitting home, when it hits 80s and 90% of the community is saying, I trust the police. You know, I would love to see a survey in Detroit, in all of our urban cities, to see how many of you trust the police, and contrasted with your cities and suburbs in the UP, and see how much they trust the police and how much we trust the police, and contrast those. I think that would be an awesome survey and great information to find out. What do you think your guesstimation of that outcome would be, Christine, if we did a survey about the trust level
Wayne County?
in Wayne County?
Probably about 30%.
And that's just being honest, because you're in the courtroom daily, so you're talking to clients and everything, and 30% is probably, it's sobering, but I believe it to be true. In Oakland County, I'm not so much sure about what it would be in Oakland County. What do you think? Just a guesstimation, Brett. What do you think it would be in Oakland County? You had to guess.
I think the beauty of measuring this is it eliminates the guess, right? So, and
Yeah.
it eliminates the uninformed argument where sides, hey, it is what it is. I can tell you, if I were to survey my youth, my teens, I would suggest it's probably in the range of Christine's. And if I were to interview and survey our African American brothers and sisters who serve in law enforcement, I think you'd also see a concern. You'd see a percentage that they weren't comfortable with. So I think that we fall for what we want to believe to be true. And it's no different than our own physical health. We don't go get our physicals because we don't want to hear the bad news. We don't want to hear, hey, your blood pressure's up. You don't get some more steps, and we don't want to hear that. And I think in our communities, we've got to get comfortable asking this question. I can tell you this, in Wayne, Oakland, and Macomb County, and I would suggest nearly in every community in Michigan, it's not where it should be.
I would have to agree. Before we move forward, I want to let everybody know that's listening, please, if you have a question, drop it in the chat box now. The last 15 minutes, we will address all questions from you to our panel or to myself. Please drop your questions in. We'd love to hear, even if it's just a statement about what you're hearing. We'd love to hear from you so that we can address some other issues. Anything that you'd like for us to discuss the last 15 minutes as well. Thank you. That was very interesting, Brett. I think you opened up Pandora's box on that one. I'm very intrigued by data and translating it and helping it to assist me in doing my my job. And in other words, it's data is wonderful. I've fallen in love with it, going to seminars and trainings and things like that. And everything that I do surveys, and I inquire and I ask people, and they look at me like I'm crazy because I'll be attending events that we're coordinating, and I'll just walk up to random parents and say, how do you like this? How many children do you have? How many children are participating? Why isn't your other child participating? Tell me the good and the bad. Don't be nice. And they just look at me like, is this lady crazy? Because I don't always want to hear the good. I want you to be real with me and give me the real reasons why or why not, because that's the only way that you can grow. So with that being said, that is kind of the premise of us having these webinars and basically open discussions. I never would have thought to do this in a webinar form. I think it's been the best thing for DEI, for MParks, because we've gotten to touch a lot more people and include a lot more people in the discussion. And it's given me the opportunity to be a lot more diverse, because I'm able to tap into people such as yourselves and bring us all together quickly and without inconveniencing you as well. You know, Glenn's able to stay out there and run Oakland University. Lorena's, you know, running the city from her living room. Brett, you're everywhere, man. Southeast Michigan is you all day. And Christine, you're trying to represent us all well and make sure that justice is being served. So with that being said, how in each of your spaces that you're in, how can we effect change? What can we do to go on from here, from where we were pre-COVID to where we are now? How can we move forward and effect change? Christine, I'll start with you.
You mean change in terms of racial justice, or just when you say change, you mean?
Yeah, I'm going broad. I want, when I say change, how does it resonate with you?
So one of the first things that I thought of, I think Glenn and Brett touched upon it, is that to solve any problem, you have to realize what the problem is, right? And so, and one thing that I think we've discussed throughout this is that there's this history, there's this fear, right? And there's a level of misunderstanding. Yeah, everybody thinks that everyone should have access, but right, what does that mean? And I remember your story, Lisa. I think we have to be mindful where you said that there was a lady and she had on the hijab and she wanted to swim, but these things had to be put in place. I think one of the things that we do, and I hope I don't get, I hope people don't frown upon me when I say this, is that we see inclusion as saying, let's let people of color participate with us, right? But I have to say this, and I want people to hear me and be very clear. People, first of all, don't really like change, right? People like to be comfortable where they are, right? And so you have these communities that are very successful. No one goes into a neighborhood, a Hispanic neighborhood, and say, well, hey, you should integrate and you should move to West Side, move out of, right? No one goes to historically, you know, maybe Asian neighborhood. And because one of the things I think when we talk about inclusion and change, we want individuals to assimilate to where the spaces where other people are at. And so I think we need, change means providing spaces where people can come and they can congregate or do things with people they feel comfortable with. And that does not mean, it doesn't make you racist if I go to a picnic and I want to sit with all my girlfriends, right? And maybe I just want to say hi to, you know, some people, but I don't want to go camping with you or whatever. So for me, it's really getting people to understand and see, and getting the public at large not to be so like, oh, you know, you're creating this space where it's only for Black people or people of color. We have to understand that there's nothing wrong with creating a space where people feel comfortable, and it may be to the exclusion of other people. Not that they're not, welcome, but understanding that. I remember we talked about, people aren't trusting because of history, and Brett talked about the Tuskegee experiment and on and on. Well, I will remind everyone that I'll remind you of Black Wall Street, right? These were thriving communities and people were happy, and there was no, so you provided access, but that was torn down, right? And then you talk about camping and going up north. I will remind you that there's Idlewild. So being able to be inclusive in a way that supports people of color and how we like to maybe camp or experience nature. And I think that would be significant change, me getting that understanding.
All right, Christine. See, that's why I just let it be broad, so you can go there. Great point. Glenn, I like your point of view now.
I guess change is already happening. It always happens. We're always in an evolutionary process, whether we know it or not. And that consciousness that we talk about all the time is an awakening. It's so much of an opportunity. I'm fortunate to be from Wayne County, from Detroit, but I work in Oakland County and have for 20 years, but I live in Macomb County now. It's funny how I have meetings in Wayne County and I see protests. I return to campus in Rochester, Auburn Hills, and I see protests. And I see young white people on the streets of Rochester, Auburn Hills, with shirts and signs that say Black Lives Matter. I go to Macomb County. It's a conservative county. And I see protests, Black Lives Matter. And I think we can take lessons from our young people. Those lessons provides an opportunity to really listen and lean in to what they're saying should be the vision for the future. A lot of us are old and tainted, but they're looking at this thing from a different perspective. They're looking at the older generation and said, you sold us a lie about why we should be aware of race and uphold standard practices and privileges. And so I think we can learn a lot. I'm learning a lot from young people now. And so I would challenge all of us, when we're in that rec space and that education space, just be a learner. The young people will tell you, they don't have these preconceived notions of how the world has to function. And so they're saying, this is wrong. They saw George Floyd and say, this is wrong. And we're not going to stop protesting. Now, I don't necessarily, condone some of the behavior that's gotten out of hand. That's not the typical protester, And so I think we have a chance to join them. Instead of taking the lead, we have a chance to join them and shape their agenda. And that's the real privilege now, is to come into those circles and provide a level of organizational structure that we have the know-how to lend to them and help them, again, come up with an agenda. Because I'm not sure in some spaces they know what they want, but they know the feeling and the emotion of seeing that America has lied to them. And that goes across all racial lines for our young people. And so it's amazing. Had you asked, how long would the protest go? I said, about a week, and it'll fizzle out. They've continued this now over weeks and now a couple of months. And so, again, I think that's encouraging, but we have to be willing to not be the teacher, be the learner.
I think that's a great that's a great point. I learned that last time with the last webinar, and I was speaking about I took my daughter to a protest that was organized by teenagers, and it brought me to tears to see those teenagers out there speaking, organizing themselves, and feeling empowered, and just being able to step back in the shadows and just support them and make sure that it remained a safe space for them to have their voices heard. No adult told them what to do or how to do it. They stood up and said, this is wrong. And this is what we're going to do. We're going to stand out here. We're going to protest. We're going to yell. We're going to have our voices be heard. And I think that right now is what we need to do, is to support our younger generation that's stepping up and saying this is wrong. And you know what you did, what we did, and we tried to affect change, and we did to a certain extent. But COVID had a way of bringing everything to the surface. And it brought everything to the surface once we all had to sit still. What happens when you sit still? Your mind starts to turn, you start to think. And that's what happened. We were sitting still when George Floyd happened. We were sitting still when all of these other atrocities were happening. And people actually saw it for a change. Instead of just walking past the TV or flipping the channel, they were sitting still. You were forced to pay attention. So it's not like these things haven't been happening. It's not like we haven't been trying to institute change. It's not like we haven't been saying we need diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's not like we haven't been saying we want justice as well, because we have been. It's not like we haven't had leaders, because we have had leaders. We just lost one of our greatest leaders of our time, and Mr. Lewis. And he left a wonderfully written essay. To be that present at a time when you know you don't have much time left on this earth, to write such a touching essay to the world, it is a gift that I hope I have. I hope I have that type of courage to write such a document that will definitely live years from now once we're all gone. That this man wrote this essay to the world. I almost call it a love letter to the world, because it was all about love and what we need to do and what's been done and what we can do. It gave you hope. It really did. It really did. Lorena, I don't think we got your and Brett, I'm going to get you as well before we get off of here. I don't think we've got any questions, so I definitely want to hear your words as well. Go ahead, Lorena.
Sure. So my words on change. So I think from the municipal perspective, especially Parks and Recreation, I think it's very important for all of our professionals to know what's happening in your city. What changes are currently happening. Be aware of that. I actually had, I'm sorry. Okay.
I'd like to introduce to you guys Austin. He's our other coworker.
So, sorry. So, and know what's changing around you. So, for instance, I had a good conversation with our police chief today, and in preparation for this meeting as well, just to understand, one, where are we now? What are you seeing? You know, we went from rallies and demonstrations in Ferndale. Has it died down a lot? Because what I'm seeing, it has died down a lot. But where are we going from here? And how are people expressing other ways? And so we had a good conversation, and he just talked about a lot of what the police department is doing and been doing anyway, which was very impressive. So he referred me to 8can'twait.org, and it's a lot of different initiatives that police are doing as far as movements and reforms within their departments, such as banning chokeholds, giving warnings before actually shooting, de-escalating before, you know, reacting, and they rather communicate before a force, and they're against police shooting from like moving vehicles or to a moving vehicle, so on and so forth. And he said a lot of those things they were already doing, and what they weren't doing, they're implementing now. So, you know, just learning what's happening will not only, you know, educate you so you can educate the public and all the residents around you, but as well as your staff, especially staff that are minorities or people of color. So they understand this is what your city is doing for you. Don't stop the movement, because we've got your back. And you are in a place of comfort that supports you and everyone, you know, it's inclusive, of course, for or what you're trying to do. And then I will also say, continue to uplift your staff, create a space for them to want to create change. Let them know it's a safe space. Of course, we're all limited with resources, but what can we do? I don't want to stop your ideas or, and I'm talking COVID as well too. So for change and to make these current times better and for us to grow as a staff and as well as a community. So, creating a safe space and continuing to uplift them, because the last thing you want to do is discourage anyone from ideas or a movement or being active in any capacity to make positive change. And then lastly, I see change by expanding on partnerships, working closer with others. What are others doing? What can we do or adapt that of what you're doing, or work together on something to create a different space for change. So, that's just some of the things that, especially taken away from this conversation, and I feel moving forward, it's important, especially in the Parks and Recreation field, to make change and create a space for people to want to make change.
Thank you. Brett, did I get your can I get your take on change?
So I just think that when we're in moments of great disruption, you used Dr. King's intentional word of chaos. We can sometimes feel like we have no control, no compass, no way forward. And I would just encourage all of us to recognize that exactly where we are, we have incredible power. It's our job to be able to take the time and center ourselves and to choose not to act in small ways, to think big, to realize that we have power and resources that can guide us through COVID, guide us to our healthier community experience. And then just lastly, I think you're right with Congressman Lewis's charge. The term has been there for a long time, but it's resurfacing, and you've got to be up to good trouble so we can have big impact. And if we ourselves, doesn't mean we're perfect every day, but if we allow COVID and all these things to just keep us in one corner of our house, we'll have missed the opportunity to be incredible ambassadors that will impact everybody in our community, our families at home. And when our last day comes, we can feel like we were in the game and we gave it 100%. And that's really important.
Thank you. Right now, I don't know if Clay was able to make it on the line. Tina, was Clay able to make it on the webinar today?
He is on. If you give me one moment, I can unmute him. 1 second.
Okay, no problem. First of all, I'd like to thank everyone. Believe it or not, that was a fast 2 hours. You guys were exceptional as always. Thank you for everything, for your insight. I don't know what direction we'll be taking next for the next webinar. If you have any, if anyone out there has any ideas of what you'd like for DEI to discuss or address going forward, please feel free to email me at lbryant@ferndale.mi.gov. If you didn't get that, don't worry, you'll get my email address in your email once Tina sends it out. And I just wanted Clay to speak a little bit before we wrap this up, and then I have a few more words to you after he finishes. Is Clay ready yet?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Hi, Clay. How are you?
Hey, guys. I'm doing very well. I thank you. I did. It looks like I was the only one to put in a question, and it was really, if we're running out of time, I just wanted to say thank you. Obviously, you guys did a good job of answering all of the questions prior to them being asked today. And what I would like to say is that these conversations have become part of our association more so now than ever. And there's a few people that I need to thank prior to addressing the panelists today. One of them have been some of our past presidents and our current president of our association that have really taken on the challenge to heighten MParks's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and putting resources, time, and energy into finding the right people to lead this charge on our behalf as a greater association across the state. And it goes back to as far as Brett Kaczynski, the city of Lansing, through John Lefevre, now most recently with our current president and Jennifer Provenzano, who's really, heightened the profile again and was the one who recommended we reach out to Lisa to chair this committee, and talked just so wonderfully about her ability to pull some things together that we had been working on. And we will see no interruption moving into our new president coming in, and Emily Stevens, again from the city of Lansing. And so the board has made a commitment to this movement in a way that I don't know that MParks has ever seen before. And there's going to be some further discussions related to our strategic plan and how our board of directors operates, and how diversity, equity, and inclusion is going to be the foundational piece of everything that we do. We certainly will have issues and things outside of that we want to deal with as a profession, but it's all going to be approached and looked at through the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how are we providing access to our wonderful spaces around the state to everybody. And again, I think what's so wonderful about our association is it is maybe not necessarily diverse as we would like to see it in race, and specifically that issue, but we are tremendously diverse in our views of, we have a very diverse group on our board. I think we're 70% female in a world where our board in MParks, if you look back through history, really was a male-dominated board of directors and leadership team. So we're looking at all the ways we can continue to elevate that profile, but just I'm at a loss of words to say the fact that Lisa's been able to pull in experts such as yourselves who are on this line today, and who were with us at the last time we all got together, and been able to have this conversation. Lisa, I think you said it best, is maybe these webinars is the way we should have been going about this all along. We're able to bring in so much more, and I think we were up to 42 or 43 people on the line at one time. 2 hours is sometimes a little bit long to ask folks to hang with us all day on a work day, but we're standing strong at 30, and we've been able to put folks in front of us that we probably couldn't have gotten in a room together with us. And for that, I am just forever grateful to you folks on the panel. Brett, I don't know that we've ever met before, but certainly have followed and loved the work you're doing, and know what's going on down there a little bit. And Christine, Glenn, and Lorena obviously got to see you in the last one, and Lorena being a member, always enjoy seeing you as much as I possibly can. So we're just grateful as an organization to be able to sit and have very candid and open conversations that are meant to make us feel uncomfortable, and meant to make us hear what you're saying. I think that was my biggest takeaway from the first one. And I don't know who said it, but someone said, and it might have been you, Lisa, yeah, you can say you're listening to us, but are you really hearing what we're saying? And that was my biggest takeaway, is I need to focus myself on hearing what the message is and not just listening to what it is folks are saying. And so that was an immediate takeaway and a change in the way that I approach conversations. And so I know there's many more from our members as well. So just very much appreciate your time, your energy, your effort, what you do on a daily basis to continue to elevate these conversations is nothing short of obviously amazing in my mind. And I know it's long, hard work, and we're here to support and help and do anything we can for the Parks and Recreation advocates out there. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Clay. And again, I'd like to say thank you to everyone that was on the panel today. Tina will, if the panel would like for your email or any type of contact information to be shared, she will share it via email with our constituents. And I would just like to leave everyone with a few words to kind of wrap this up, because again, my whole motivation for this was Dr. King's book. And I'm not trying to sell the book. I don't get any money off of this, guys. But I'm going to leave you with a few of his words to wrap this up, because I think it's very poignant right now. Freedom is not won by passive acceptance of suffering. Freedom is won by struggle against suffering. Racial understanding is not something we find, but something that we must create. We are now faced with the fact that tomorrow is today. We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now. In this unfolding conundrum of life and history, there is such a thing as being too late. We still have a choice today: nonviolent coexistence or violent co-annihilation. This may well be mankind's last chance to choose between chaos and community. I hope you all choose community. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, panelists. I hope to work with you all again. And yes, I will be calling you again in another capacity. Thank you, everyone. Have a blessed and prosperous week. And remember, if you need anything from Lisa Bryant, it's lbryant@ferndalemI.gov. Thank you all. Have a blessed day.
Thank you, Lisa.
Lisa.